Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Judy Kepher-Gona, founder and director at Sustainable Travel and Tourism Agenda. We are a Pan-Africa organization co-creating solutions for sustainable development of tourism in Africa. We have an overall goal and aim of modeling a sustainable future for Africa's tourism. Thank you for having me today to share in this roundtable on tourism stakeholders, stakeholder engagement, and rights in the tourism industry. I'd like to start with this disclaimer that human rights is not a favorite subject of the tourism industry. Looking at tourism in sub-Saharan Africa, where we have wildlife tourism as a big segment of our tourism, we know that this segment of tourism, particularly conservation, is riddled with stories of eviction, of departicipation, of inequitable benefits, of exclusion of host communities, of leakages out of these destinations. So ideally, when we talk about tourism in most parts of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, human rights is not a favorable topic. But I'm glad that we are gathered here today confidently, facing a challenge that is amongst the last ones that we have to face in the continent to address issues of human rights, issues of inclusion, issues of equity and diversity in the tourism industry. Allow me to share some of the experiences that I have had over the years working in the field of tourism in the continent. We all know that tourism by itself is not an industry, but tourism is a collection of different goods and services provided by different stakeholders. That in itself makes tourism a partnership industry. A partnership industry cannot exist without stakeholders. Every other partner in the tourism industry value chain is a stakeholder. Whether you're talking the traveler, whether you're talking the communities in the host destination, whether you're talking the tourism planners and the policymakers, whether you're talking the transport providers and the co-creators and curators of leisure, each one of them is so dependent on the other to create the final product that we sell, that is sold to the traveler. But not so often do we talk about stakeholder engagement in tourism as a way of achieving and realizing, acknowledging everybody's rights and making sure that everyone participates effectively in the tourism value chain. In my organization at STTA, based on the experiences of the work that we have done over the years, we came up with a model for effective engagement of stakeholders in tourism. This is a 10-step agenda that ensures that at the end of the day, we have a thriving tourism industry where rights and responsibilities have been identified and acknowledged by every stakeholder in the tourism value chain. So what does this process look like? I'm not claiming that this is the ultimate and the only way to achieve effective stakeholder engagement in tourism, but at least it provides us with a method that we can build on. In our method for effective stakeholder engagement, the first step is about mapping your stakeholders. Many times in the tourism industry or the business of tourism, when you ask industry players, who are your stakeholders, many of them will not respond immediately to this question because they start asking, what do you mean by my stakeholders? I am a business person. I book tickets. Clients come to me. I book tickets. I sell the tickets and they give me their money and they go on their safari. I am a tour operator. I organize packages. What do you mean by stakeholders? So by stakeholders, we mean everybody that a tourism business interacts with in the process of delivering an experience or delivering a product to the final client. So the process of mapping stakeholders enables every player in the tourism industry to know their points of strength, their collaborative strengths, to know their points of weaknesses, to know their points of risks. Who is that collaborator or stakeholder who poses the biggest risk to your business? Who is that stakeholder who has the greatest opportunities for your business? Who is that stakeholder that gives you an opportunity to give back or to pay forward in the communities that you work with? So we encourage all stakeholders, all tourism businesses to map their stakeholders, to know, do a basic SWOT and know who has strengths that you need, who is a threat to you, who comes onto your table with opportunities, and how do you work them all out so that at the end of the day, everybody's interest amongst your stakeholders have been addressed. And I will use a practical example as we go along for a model that I have been engaged with. The building of community conservancies in Kenya is actually modeled around what I am going to talk about, because based on that experience, I was able to curate this 10-point process of effective stakeholder engagement. At the onset of setting community-managed conservation areas in Kenya, commonly known as conservancies, the first step that we took in that process, working in Masai Mara at that particular time, was to identify stakeholders in conservation. And we agreed with those we were working with that communities were big stakeholders in conservation in Kenya, yet the Tourism Act and the Wildlife Act at that particular time and the Environment Act did not even recognize them or acknowledge them as custodians of places and assets that tourism uses for experiences and for selling products. So we identified and acknowledged communities as key stakeholders. Within the community itself, we identified additional stakeholders. There were youth, there were women, there were tour operators, there were policymakers, there were other NGOs working in conservation in these areas. There were several sub-sector stakeholders just within the community itself. So we started by mapping these stakeholders and identifying what was the interest of each one of them in this new model of conservation that was being proposed. What was the interest of tour operators as stakeholders? What was the interest of governments and conservation NGOs as stakeholders? What was the interest of pastoralists, communities, owners of large herds of livestock that depend on landscape and the pasture from the landscape? What would it mean for them? What would it mean for the next generation of the communities that wanted to give up their land or set some of their aside their land for conservation? What will it mean for the young people? In 10 years to come, in 20 years to come, will this model make sense for them? So in the process of identifying and working with all these stakeholders, we set out on what we called a community readiness process. Today, I would call it a stakeholder readiness process. Were all these stakeholders ready? And in what form? What was their fear? What were their aspirations? What did they effectively want to see at the end of the day? When a community conserved area was described, would they find their voice in it? Would they see their opportunities in it? Would they see a future in it? So that is a very important process. And when we don't get the stakeholder mapping correctly, it means that we would have excluded some people. We would have left out some important issues that we need to discuss. Once you have mapped your stakeholders, you move on to the next step where you go into an exploration state, which means you've already done a diagnostic stage. Who are they and what are their interests and what are their needs? When you put all this together in stakeholder engagement, the next step is to jointly have a diagnostic process where you identify and lift out what are now the common goals for these people. What are their common priorities? What are the risks that all of them are talking about, which means it's a common risk? What are the opportunities and benefits that each one of them is seeing? What are the things that they are able to co-create together new things that can come out of these collaborations. This is now the exploration stage where you explore what is possible, what is risky, and what is sustainable for the future. Like the first process, it takes a lot of dialogues in different forms with different identifying. For example, you've got to pick out what are the thorny issues for a particular interest group. When you've effectively gone through an exploration stage, you are ready for design. You now pick all this information together and you are now seriously co-creating. You're co-creating a solution. You're co-creating a method that will work for all of you. Now, the design process, the design stage is very, very important. And we deliberately use the word design and not plan. Because design, we have control. When we're designing, we have control. We have already done the exploration and the diagnosis. We know if it was a piece of cloth that we were designing for myself, we will know my measurements. I'm this tall, I'm this short, I'm this wide, or I'm this thin. All those things enable us to design something that fits. So we deliberately use the word design and not plan. So we design solutions for the aspirations of all the stakeholders that will address everything that the stakeholders have brought on board. Now, the design stage goes back and forth. You do a design, you do a pilot, you test it, you come back and review it. And when you have reviewed it, now we say we have a final design. You have co-designed the entire solution for what you're trying to co-create with your fellow stakeholders. It is now time to start mobilizing resources, because then you can cost what it is that you have designed. It will take this number of meetings. It will take coming up with a geological map. It will take mapping boundaries. It will take doing all these things. You put that down together and now you cost it, and then you look for potential resources. How are we going to finance what we have come up with? Once you have found your finances, you move on to the next stage, that is now the implementation stage. And we all know that following on implementation, you have to do your monitoring and evaluation. You've got to do your, after your monitoring and evaluation, you have to constantly do your documentation. Then you've got to do your reporting. Then you've got to do your communication. And at the end of it, you are at a new stage again when you are ready to do all this. This can take a period of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, depending on what you designed at the beginning. And then it gives you another opportunity when you come up to the end of it to start the process all over again, which means a stakeholder engagement process is an ongoing activity. It's an ongoing event. It's not something that you do once and forget, because a lot of things change along the way. When we modeled the first conservancies in the Mara in 2010, when COVID came in 2020, everything had to change, and there was a new opportunity to sit down again. And as I stand here to talk to you today, new discussions are happening, new explorations are happening, because a number of things have shifted over time. So stakeholder engagement is not a one-off event. Constantly, we've got to act and react to the situations that we find ourselves involved in and find ourselves in from time to time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I presented to you today that there is a method for effective stakeholder engagement. We found our method. Each one of us can find your method that is so unique to the situations and areas that you work with. And now let me also put this to you, that this process ensures inclusion and it ensures equity. And when we have inclusion and equity, to a large extent, we have addressed quite a number of issues that are human rights issues in the tourism industry. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you this day, and I wish you greater deliberations as we conclude this roundtable on tourism, stakeholder engagement, and human rights. Thank you.